When my own brother betrayed my trust, it felt like losing family forever. This is a vulnerable confession on pain, forgiveness, and slowly opening my heart again.
I felt so betrayed. There was this deep sense of hurt that lingered for a long time. It was a real blow to our relationship, and it took us a long time to start healing from it. There's a silence that betrayal leaves behind, deeper than any spoken word, colder than any winter night. It's the kind of quiet that hollows you out, echoing with all the things that were and all the things that will never be again. For me, that silence was born from the wreckage of my relationship with my own brother, Mark. It felt like an amputation, a violent tearing away of a part of my very soul. I'm sitting here now, years later, and the ghost of that pain still clings to the edges of my memory, a phantom ache that reminds me of how profoundly a heart can break, not just from loss, but from a deliberate, calculated act by someone you believed was family, someone you loved unconditionally. I used to think I understood pain. I'd had my share of disappointments, heartbreaks, the usual scrapes and bruises life dishes out, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the sensation of being utterly dismantled from the inside by a hand that once held mine so tightly. Sibling betrayal is a unique beast. It's not just the loss of trust in a person, it's the shattering of a foundational myth, the idea that certain bonds are unbreakable, that blood truly runs thicker than water. It's the feeling that the very ground beneath your feet has given way, swallowed whole by a sinkhole you never saw coming, because you were too busy looking into the eyes of the person you trusted most. When Mark did what he did, it wasn't just money I lost, although that was significant. It wasn't just a physical place, though that too was ripped away. What truly vanished was a future I had meticulously built in my mind, a shared history that was suddenly rewritten with a poison pen, and perhaps most devastatingly, a piece of my own innocence. I lost the ability to see the world, or even my own family, through the same trusting lens. The world became a colder, more dangerous place overnight, because if he could do this, who couldn't? For a very long time, I just existed in that cold silence, adrift in a sea of anger, confusion, and overwhelming grief. I felt raw, exposed, like all my protective layers had been stripped away. Every memory, every shared laugh, every childhood secret we swore to keep was suddenly tainted, replayed in my mind through the filter of his ultimate deception. It became a question I couldn't escape. Was it always there, this capacity for cruelty, lurking beneath the surface of my beloved brother? Was our entire relationship a lie, a carefully constructed illusion he maintained until it was convenient to discard? Today, I want to tell you my story, not because I have all the answers, and certainly not because the wounds are completely gone. Some scars you learn are permanent, but because I believe in the power of speaking our truths, even the ones that ache. I want to share the journey from absolute devastation to a place where I could breathe again, where I could start to mend not just the practical pieces of my life, but the shattered fragments of my heart. This isn't a story of quick fixes or triumphant victories. It's a vulnerable confession about the agonizingly slow process of healing, the difficult dance with forgiveness, not for the betrayer, but for oneself, and the quiet courage it takes to slowly, tentatively open your heart again to the possibility of trust, even when it feels like the most dangerous thing in the world. It's a story about finding my way back to myself after being utterly lost in the shadow of my siblings' betrayal. Our story, like most family stories, began with warmth and connection, at least on the surface. Mark and I grew up in a small, tight-knit suburban town in upstate New York. He was 2 years older than me, my big brother, my first hero, my first tormentor, and ultimately my closest confidant. Our parents, hardworking and loving, instilled in us the values of family loyalty, integrity, and the importance of looking out for each other. Dinner tables were filled with laughter and lively discussions. Holidays were boisterous affairs, and the feeling of us, our family unit, was paramount. Mark, bless him, was the charming one, the extrovert. He had an easy smile, a quick wit, and a knack for making friends wherever he went. He was effortlessly cool in my eyes, and I, the quieter, more studious younger sister, often lived in his shadow, not resentfully, but admiringly. I remember countless summer afternoons spent exploring the woods behind our house, building elaborate forts, him always leading the charge, me following faithfully, a silent pact of shared adventure. He taught me how to climb the tallest oak without fear, how to skip stones across the creek, and even how to sneak a cookie from the jar without Mom noticing. These weren't just childhood antics, they were the threads that wove the fabric of our bond, creating a tapestry of shared experiences and unspoken understanding. As we grew older, our paths diverged slightly, as siblings often do. Mark went off to college a few hours away, chasing a business degree, eager to make his mark on the world. I stayed closer to home for my own studies, leaning towards the arts and humanitarian work. But despite the distance, our connection remained strong. Phone calls were frequent, full of updates, advice, and the occasional shared frustration about our parents. We'd meet up on weekends, and it felt like no time had passed. We'd pick up right where we left off, effortlessly falling back into the rhythm of our long-standing friendship. Our grandmother, Nana Rose, was a pivotal figure in our lives. She was the heart of our extended family, a woman of immense grace, wisdom, and quiet strength. Nana had a small, rustic cottage nestled by a lake, a few hours north, that was our sanctuary. It was a place of endless summer days, crackling bonfires, and the smell of pine and lake water. Every summer, Mark and I would spend weeks there with her, learning to fish, stargazing, listening to her stories about her own youth. That cottage wasn't just a place, it was a living memory, imbued with generations of love and tradition. It was the place where we felt most free, most connected, not just to each other, but to our family's legacy. When Nana Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep, it was a profound loss for all of us, but especially for Mark and me. We were both in our mid-20s then, starting to navigate adulthood, and her absence felt like the world had tilted. In her will, Nana left the lake cottage to Mark and me, jointly. Her intention, clearly stated in a loving letter she'd left us, was for it to be a place for you both to always return to, a refuge, a reminder of family, and a foundation for your shared futures. She also left a significant sum in a trust to be managed jointly for the upkeep and eventual renovation of the cottage, and as a small nest egg for any shared dreams you wish to pursue. It wasn't life-changing wealth, but it was substantial, a comfortable cushion and a profound symbol of her trust in us, her grandchildren, and in our bond. We were ecstatic, touched beyond words. The cottage wasn't just property, it was Nana's spirit preserved. Mark and I had long conversations, dreaming of the future. We talked about turning it into a beautiful rental property when we weren't using it, generating some passive income, or maybe even one day retiring there together, side by side. We imagined our own children someday running through those very woods, swimming in that very lake. It felt like a sacred responsibility, a promise we made to Nana and to each other to cherish and grow this legacy. We set up a joint bank account for the trust funds, agreeing to manage it together with full transparency. Mark, with his business background, naturally took the lead on the financial aspects of the trust and the cottage expenses. I trusted him implicitly. He was my brother, my partner in this beautiful legacy. What could possibly go wrong?
The first cracks in our seemingly impenetrable foundation began to appear subtly, almost imperceptibly, like tiny hairline fractures in a wall you've always believed to be solid.
It started perhaps a year or so after Nana's passing, when Mark's life began to take a different trajectory. He'd left his corporate job, full of optimism, to pursue a groundbreaking tech startup with some friends. He was passionate, almost feverish about it. I was incredibly proud of his ambition, even if a part of me felt a vague sense of unease about the inherent risks of a startup. Initially, our conversations about the cottage and the trust fund continued as normal. Mark would send me quarterly statements, sometimes with a quick email explaining any outgoings from maintenance or taxes. Everything seemed in order. But then the statements started to become less frequent. When I'd ask, he'd have an excuse. "Oh, the accountant's been slow," or "I've been swamped with the startup. I'll get it to you next week." I didn't push too hard. He was busy, I reasoned. He was my brother. He was trustworthy. Then came the requests. First, it was small. "Hey sis, could you chip in a bit more for the cottage taxes this quarter? My funds are a little tied up with the business right now." I'd always agree, without question. Then it escalated. "I need a short-term loan from the trust, just a temporary bridge for the startup. It's a sure thing, a huge client is about to sign, and I'll pay it back with interest in a month, 2 at most." He'd paint such a vivid picture of success, of how this would benefit us all in the long run. I hesitated the first time, a knot forming in my stomach. The trust wasn't for this, it was Nana's legacy, our security. But his voice was so convincing, so earnest, filled with that old charm that always disarmed me. "Come on, sis, you know I'd never put us at risk. We're in this together." He even made a point of saying us. How could I say no to my brother who was clearly on the cusp of something big? I approved the first transfer, and then the second, and then a third, each one larger than the last, until the short-term loans were substantial portions of Nana's carefully built nest egg. My unease grew into a persistent thrum of anxiety. The huge client never seemed to materialize. The repayments never came. When I gently pressed him, he'd become defensive, even irritable. "Are you doubting me? Do you think I'm trying to screw you over?" His words stung, making me feel guilty for even asking. I'd back down, apologizing, blaming my own anxieties. The dynamic shifted. I was no longer an equal partner, but a worried sister trying not to upset the volatile genius. Visits to the cottage became fewer and farther between. When I suggested we go together, he'd be busy. When I went alone, I noticed things. A broken window pane left unrepaired. The dock looking a little more dilapidated than I remembered. Small signs of neglect that chipped away at the image of the pristine legacy we were supposed to be preserving. I'd mention them to Mark, and he'd brush them off. "Minor repairs, I'll get to them. Just stretched thin, you know." My parents, bless their hearts, were oblivious, or perhaps chose to be. They saw Mark as the ambitious son, forging his own path. When I tried to voice my concerns, vaguely, about his financial decisions, they'd dismiss it. "Oh, startups are tough, honey. He'll figure it out. He's smart." They didn't see the statements I wasn't getting, the excuses, the growing evasiveness. I felt utterly alone with my growing dread. The knot in my stomach tightened, a constant companion. I started doing my own digging, subtly at first. I tried to access the joint account online, only to find the password had been changed. When I asked Mark, he blamed a system glitch and promised to send me the new credentials, which never arrived. I became more insistent, more direct. Our calls grew shorter, punctuated by his clipped tones and my rising panic. I'd lie awake at night, the silence of my apartment amplifying my fears. Was I losing my mind? Was I imagining things? This was Mark, my brother, the one who taught me to trust. But the evidence, small and insidious, was piling up, piece by agonizing piece. The warmth of our shared past began to feel like a distant echo, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that something fundamental had irrevocably broken between us. The truth, I knew, was out there, and I was terrified of finding it.
The truth arrived not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, devastating paper cuts.
It began with an innocuous-looking envelope in my mailbox addressed to owner or occupant of the lake cottage. I remember it vividly. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the air is sharp and smells of wood smoke, usually a time of peace for me. But as I held that envelope, an icy premonition gripped me. It wasn't from our property management company, nor from the local tax office. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The letter inside was concise, formal, and utterly brutal. It was a notice of default on a mortgage, specifying the lake cottage as collateral. My eyes scanned the legalese, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Failure to remedy default, foreclosure proceedings. The words swam before my eyes, but the meaning was terrifyingly clear. The cottage, Nana's cottage, our cottage, had been mortgaged, and the payments weren't being made. I remember a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Mortgaged? How? Mark and I owned it free and clear. Nana had paid it off years ago. The letter made no mention of me, only Mark Peterson and Jane Doe. Jane Doe, obviously my placeholder name since my name wasn't registered on this particular mortgage. It was a secret mortgage, taken out without my knowledge, without my consent. My world didn't just tilt, it imploded. I tried calling Mark, my fingers fumbling with the phone, straight to voicemail. Again and again. Each unanswered ring was a hammer blow to my chest. I left frantic messages, my voice rising in a desperate plea for an explanation, for a denial, for anything to contradict the stark reality staring at me from that legal document. He didn't call back, not that day, not the next. Driven by a cold, righteous fury and a profound sense of violation, I went straight to the county records office. It was a blur of paperwork, hushed conversations with clerks, and the surreal feeling of navigating a nightmare while wide awake. I found the documents. In meticulous, official script, it was all there. A mortgage taken out on the cottage a year and a half ago, signed by Mark, and a forged signature that was supposedly mine. The amount was staggering, far more than the loans he'd mentioned. He had mortgaged our shared inheritance using my forged signature to fund his failing startup and was now defaulting on it. My knees nearly gave out. I stumbled out of the building into the crisp autumn air, but I felt like I was drowning. The trees, the familiar street, everything looked alien. The sheer audacity, the depth of the deception was unfathomable. It wasn't just a loan, it was grand theft, a violation of trust so profound it felt like a physical assault. He hadn't just dipped into the trust fund, he'd gambled away Nana's legacy, our shared future, and my own legal standing without a single word. That night, I confronted him. He finally answered my call, his voice wary. I didn't mince words. Mark, I know everything. The mortgage, my forged signature, the default. What in God's name have you done? The line went silent for a long moment, stretched taut with his guilt and my rage. Then his voice, hollow and devoid of its usual charm, finally spoke. I was going to fix it. The startup was so close. I just needed more time. Time? I shrieked, my voice cracking with unshed tears. You forged my name. You put Nana's cottage, our only inheritance, at risk. You lied to me over and over again. He started to explain, to plead, to offer excuses. His startup had needed a huge capital injection. Investors had pulled out. He'd panicked. He swore he'd intended to pay it all back, to refinance, to make it right before I ever found out. His voice was laced with desperation, but it sounded hollow, thin, like paper. "It's gone, Mark," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Everything. The money, the cottage, us. It's all gone." He had taken the last vestige of our shared legacy and used it as a desperate gamble, a gamble he lost, dragging me down with him. I remember the absolute quiet after that phone call ended. My world had shattered into a million pieces. The brother I knew, the one I loved, the one I trusted implicitly, was a ghost. In his place was a stranger, a betrayer, who had not only stolen my inheritance, but had also stolen my sense of security, my belief in family, and my ability to ever look at him, or perhaps anyone, the same way again. The major emotional turning point wasn't just the discovery, it was the chilling realization that my brother, my blood, was capable of such profound deception. It was the moment I understood that everything I thought I knew about my family and about him had been a beautiful, devastating lie.
The immediate aftermath was a blur of raw, visceral pain. I moved through my days in a haze, feeling disembodied, as if watching a terrible movie of someone else's life. Sleep became a cruel mockery, offering no escape, only vivid replays of Mark's confession, his hollow voice, the image of my forged signature. My appetite vanished. Food tasted like cardboard. I lost weight rapidly, the stress manifesting physically, a constant knot in my stomach. The world, once vibrant, became muted, a dull gray canvas. Emotionally, I was a wreck. Anger, hot and volatile, would surge through me, quickly followed by waves of profound grief. It wasn't just the loss of the cottage, though that felt like a death in itself, the symbolic end of Nana's legacy, our shared dreams. It was the loss of Mark. The brother I had loved, admired, and trusted implicitly was gone, replaced by a stranger who had committed an act of betrayal so deep, so calculated, it felt like a knife twisting in my heart. Legally, it was a nightmare. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. I had to scramble to prove that my signature was forged, that I had no knowledge of the mortgage. It meant hiring a lawyer, compiling documents, enduring endless interrogations. Each step was a fresh wound, a reminder of Mark's deceit. The stress was immense, the financial burden of legal fees crippling. My credit score, once pristine, was irrevocably damaged by the default, a consequence of his actions that lingered like a dark stain. I eventually managed to get my name cleared, but not before the cottage was lost to foreclosure, sold at auction for a fraction of its true worth. The dream of Nana's haven, gone. My parents, caught in the crossfire, were devastated. They struggled to comprehend what Mark had done. Their reaction, though, became another source of pain. While they offered me sympathy, there was also a pervasive sense of denial, a desperate attempt to protect their son. "He made a mistake, honey. He's suffering too," my mother would say, trying to broker a peace that I was nowhere near ready for. My father, usually stoic, became withdrawn, unable to reconcile the son he knew with the man who had committed such a grievous wrong. Their attempts to minimize Mark's actions, to attribute it to a bad business decision rather than a deliberate betrayal, felt like a betrayal in itself. I was alone in my anger, alone in my profound sense of loss, while they clung to the idealized image of their son, even if it meant overlooking his devastating actions. My relationship with Mark completely fractured. We tried to talk a few times, at my parents' insistence. Each conversation was a futile exercise in pain. He would offer remorse, but it always felt superficial, overshadowed by his own self-pity and attempts to justify his actions. I was under so much pressure. I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought I could fix it. There was no true accountability, no genuine understanding of the depth of the wound he had inflicted. I needed to hear him acknowledge that he had broken my trust, not just made a mistake. I needed him to see my pain, not just his own. But he couldn't, or wouldn't. The chasm between us grew wider, deeper, until it became an unbridgeable canyon.
I became intensely isolated. The shame of what had happened, the embarrassment of having been so thoroughly duped by my own brother, kept me from sharing the full extent of my story with many friends. How do you explain that your brother, your blood, could do this to you? The trust issues seeped into every corner of my life. I found myself questioning everyone's motives, scrutinizing every casual comment, building walls around my heart thicker and higher than ever before. Every phone call, every email, every interaction felt laden with potential deception. I lost faith in the goodness of people, and more tragically, I lost faith in my own judgment. If I couldn't see this coming from Mark, who could I ever truly trust? The practical consequences were also profound. I had to start over financially. The small nest egg I had saved, along with the dreams I had for the cottage, were gone. I worked extra shifts, took on freelance projects, meticulously saving every penny. It was a long, arduous climb back to financial stability, made heavier by the emotional baggage I carried. Each dollar earned felt like a small victory against the tide of despair, a defiant act of rebuilding my life from the rubble. But it was a lonely battle, fought in the shadow of a betrayal that had cost me not just money and property, but a piece of my very identity, a piece of my family, and the innocent belief that some bonds are truly sacred. The journey from that place of utter devastation to where I am today was not a straight path. It was a winding, arduous climb, full of false starts, relapses into anger, and moments of despair. For a long time, the bitterness felt like a cloak I couldn't shed, a heavy garment that weighed me down and choked out any light. I realized, eventually, that while Mark's betrayal had been inflicted upon me, the continued suffering was a choice, albeit an unconscious one, that I was making by holding on to the anger. It was a poison I was drinking, hoping it would hurt him, but it was only destroying me. The turning point began subtly. It started with acknowledging that I couldn't change what Mark did, nor could I change his inability or unwillingness to truly atone. My focus had to shift from him to me. I sought therapy, a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. In those sessions, I began to unpack the layers of grief, anger, and self-blame. My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness was not about condoning Mark's actions or forgetting the pain. It was about releasing myself from the prison of resentment. It was about severing the last invisible tether that still bound me to his destructive act. This wasn't an overnight revelation. It was a slow, agonizing process. I wrote letters to Mark that I never sent, pouring out every raw emotion, every question, every accusation. This catharsis allowed me to vent without engaging in another painful, unproductive confrontation. I practiced mindfulness, learning to observe my anger and pain without judgment, allowing it to exist without consuming me. I started to rebuild my life, not just financially, but emotionally. I cultivated new friendships, people who showed me that trust could still exist, even if it had to be earned cautiously. I rediscovered old passions and pursued new ones, finding joy in creativity and community service, things that had nothing to do with money or property. I learned to distinguish between healthy boundaries and absolute walls. I realized that protecting myself didn't mean shutting out the entire world, but rather discerning who deserved access to my vulnerability. I learned the vital lesson that some people, even family, are simply incapable of giving you what you need, and that's a reflection of them, not a failing on your part. It was a painful acceptance, especially concerning my parents, who, despite their love, could not fully grasp the depth of my trauma or truly hold Mark accountable in the way I needed. I had to forgive them, too, for their limitations and learn to find peace in loving them imperfectly. My relationship with Mark remains distant. We speak only on holidays, brief, cordial exchanges devoid of any true warmth or depth. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful apology that magically healed everything. I came to accept that some relationships, once shattered, cannot be fully restored to their original form. But I also understood that my healing didn't depend on his repentance. It depended on my own journey of self-acceptance and resilience. Today, I carried scars of that betrayal, but they no longer define me. They are etched onto my soul as a reminder of my strength, my capacity to survive, and my ability to rebuild. I've learned profound lessons about the true meaning of family, that it extends beyond blood to those who truly see you, support you, and respect you. I've learned about the unwavering power of self-forgiveness for having been vulnerable, for having trusted. And I've learned that true healing isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering with less pain, about finding a quiet, resilient peace within yourself. The ultimate life lesson from this agonizing experience is this: betrayal, especially from someone you love, can absolutely cost you everything you thought you had. It can shatter your world and leave you feeling utterly lost and broken. But it does not have to be the end of your story. It can, in fact, be the crucible in which you discover an inner strength you never knew you possessed. It teaches you to build your own foundations, to rely on your own resilience, and ultimately to reclaim your own heart, piece by agonizing piece. It's about slowly, tentatively opening yourself up to life again, not with the naivety of the past, but with the wisdom of one who has walked through fire and emerged irrevocably changed, but profoundly, beautifully whole.